Hello out there. Welcome to the next episode of No Shit. My name is Matt Frazier. Today is Monday, October 16th, 2017. I got a really interesting guest here with me tonight, guys. I love having really in-depth and interesting conversations with people that know a lot about a subject matter. And it's kind of fun. I had a conversation with my guest tonight a while back about, of all things, the Ten Commandments. Because it was, I think it was right after somebody had driven a car through another set of them someplace down south or something to that effect. And I got into this really in-depth conversation with my guest, and there's a lot about the Ten Commandments that I never knew. So his name's Eric Smith. He's a really good friend of mine. I've known him for years. He is a literal student of history, and I would say a giant fan of history as well. He's very well read and has a lot of insightful information. So thank you for being here tonight, Eric. I really appreciate it. Okay. So I kind of framed this already, right, where we were talking about the Ten Commandments. And what came up in that conversation was how the Ten Commandments directly matched texts that were produced in Egypt, and I think it was called like the Scroll of the Dead or the Book of the Dead or something like that, right?
Yeah, we were talking about the differences between the Ten Commandments and the Scroll of the Dead, and basically, what you had to go through as an ancient Egyptian, what they thought you had to go through to enter into their afterlife, which was called the Duat. That's what their afterlife was called.
Right, so that was the result of it, right? But there were 10 things that you were like measured against or something like that, right?
Well, there was basically, for them, they would go through a process. When they would die, they would be led through this process by Anubis, and they would have to answer a bunch of questions to scribes at first, but then after that they would have to weigh their heart against the balance of the feather of truth to see if their heart was heavy with sin. And the criteria for whether that was the case or not was very similar to the Ten Commandments. Things like you shouldn't kill people, and you shouldn't steal, and various things like that. Things that had been worked out even prior to the Ten Commandments coming up in even more ancient times, to get along in being in a civilized place.
And the funny thing about that is, I think when you start to understand that, I guess the knee-jerk reaction for people would be to say that, they feel like, well, you're trying to say somehow that the Ten Commandments aren't really the laws of God like the Bible says it is. And really it's kind of the opposite of that, isn't it? Because if there was this omnipotent being that has existed forever, it would be the same set of laws for this being throughout history, right? And so putting that kind of, we're not putting that aside, right? Putting that aside, what you're sort of saying is that these ideals and stuff, almost verbatim, I think, from the Scroll of the Dead, whatever it is. Mm-hmm. It's almost like verbatim, right? We've seen these same sort of like social laws and stuff sort of keep popping up, right?
Yeah, and even before the Scroll of the Dead that the Egyptians had, there was the Cylinder of Cyrus, which was a Sumerian king. And
well, frame Sumerian. We're talking really ancient here, right?
Yeah, the Sumerian civilization and Sumerian people were the first civilization. Ancient Egyptians were really close, but most scholars today believe that the Sumerian civilization predated all other civilizations. Roughly speaking, though, 5 civilizations popped up around the same time, and that was China, the ancient Egyptians, the ancient Sumerians, and the Indonesian Valley, and they died out, leaving only the other 3. And China's still around today, Egypt's still around today. Sumeria eventually became Babylonia, or the Babylonian kingdom, and then eventually the Babylonian kingdom became the Assyrian.
These were the cats that were constantly like sacking Israel too, right, or something like that. Was it the Babylonians that were?
Yeah, the Babylonians and the Assyrians are definitely more involved in sacking Israel and stuff, and are mentioned far more in the Bible and things of that nature. But I mean, even predating them was the Sumerians and stuff. Predating, Christianity itself was the Sumerians. Predating Judaism, which predated Christianity, is where the Sumerians came in. I mean, they developed the first written language, and they developed the first cities that ever existed on the planet. They're responsible for the first story ever written down, the Epic of Gilgamesh.
Right, and that's a whole nother subject I'd like to talk to you about in the future, if we could, because there's some fascinating stuff that's just been discovered, I think, right, like another chapter or something to that effect.
Yeah.
Okay,
But they had laws. They had the Cylinder of Cyrus, and these were basic laws, like, not stealing, not killing, and things like that, very similar to the Ten Commandments. And I guess that was my point in that conversation, was that the Ten Commandments in the Christian religion is something that has been modified over time, and continues to be modified over time, but that the things that it struggles with is still the human condition that's existed since ancient times.
Sure.
The same issues and problems that people had to get into their afterlife and to get along in civilization. I mean, they're really tied together. I mean, these laws to get into the afterlife are really laws to get along with your fellow neighbor in civilization, because at the time that these laws came onto the scene, they entered into the first cities that were ever built.
well, you're saying from the first time that we've seen them recorded.
Yeah, yeah.
But there's still the possibility that they're even much older than
Sure,
that,
as oral
right?
tradition, yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. and
I mean, we sort of, because of Göbekli Tepe, and that's in Turkey, right? We're sort of having to move the measuring stick by a bunch now, aren't we? Because
in terms of religion and how
and
old,
not only religion, but in terms of coordinated, organized societies, because of how old that place is and what it is.
well, there's definitely a difference between organized religion and organized civilization, and for sure, organized religion predated organized civilization.
Sure, they kind of went hand in hand for a long time, right?
For a long time it did, but religion existed before civilization did. So to have temples that predate cities, I would imagine would be fairly common, because that's what I think you're seeing with Göbekli Tepe. You're seeing something that's so old that it literally predates some of the oldest things about civilization.
Well, I've heard it predates agriculture.
Exactly.
I mean, it's like, well, wait a minute.
But that's just telling you that organized religion existed before people could organize themselves for reasons other than religion.
And that's kind of my point. So if the point of the Ten Commandments is ancient, that doesn't say, just by pointing out how these same tenets go back through history, through multiple religions, multiple societies and cultures and things like that, it sort of, I guess in a way, if there is an omnipotence and there's a set of laws, they would be the same throughout history, right? So but it's really kind of cool because of they're really good ideas too, and that's the thing. Depending on how they're written, you sort of get a different context. Like the Scrolls of the Dead, right? Instead of "Thou shalt not kill," it's "I have not killed" or something like that, because in that particular case, the person's answering a question to see if they get to go to their version of heaven or whatever it is. Okay, so but when you understand them that way, though, you get like a whole different context for each of them, and you start to figure out, that there's some real common sense in this too, like significant. Like if you wanted to have an organized society, these things would almost be a requirement. I mean,
Yeah.
taking aside the deity aspect of it, whether you viewed that as an actual deity or a higher moral authority or a tenet of striving to be a more moral or a good person and things like that, it still all freaking applies, right?
Yeah, definitely. And probably, as you mentioned, comes from an oral tradition that predated any type of written language. So there's a lot of things in the Bible that can be traced back, not just to an older society and an older religion, but even beyond that to a point before there was a written historical record,
right.
Where and one of those cases, that's what a lot of the stories are in the Bible and stuff. Like, there is
Like Noah's Ark, the epic flood story,
Yeah.
right? That showed up in multiple.
yeah, that showed up in a Sumerian writing way before the Bible was written, like at least 1,000 years before the Bible was ever set down. Even the first 5 books of the Bible is from the stela dates from, and the way that they date it is these stelas that are
Okay, yeah, tell us what a stela is.
They're clay tablets. So when writing was first invented in Samaria, they basically put little marks in wet clay that was held within a wooden frame. And then they would take them out and they would bake these things. And they would make little clay tablets called, some people say steles or stelas.
That's the original eraser, because when it was clay, if you screwed up, you could just kind of fill it in and poke some more holes in it.
Exactly.
And then once you proofread it, you bake it.
Exactly. Yeah,
That's funny.
And they have found so many.
It's kind of an ingenious solution, because a stick don't have an eraser, How do you overcome that?
They even made envelopes out of clay. They even made a process where they would bake the thing they wrote inside another container if it was a royal document.
And then that sealed it.
Exactly.
So you would know if it had been read because it'd be busted open.
Yeah.
Get the Elmer's glue.
And that's what they do today. They find them all broken up and they have to piece them together, and it takes forever.
So anyway,
so this was written down in cuneiform, which is the first written language, which you would write on these clay tablets, and you would use a stylus, which is like a piece of wood that was kind of triangular, and you would,
kind of like what it is today.
Yeah. Put it in there, and the story of Noah was set down in tablets like these that's dated to this period that this type of writing is in. And it's the exact story. There's minor variations, but there are things like the amount of days that it rained and the white and black dove that were set free to find dry land. All of these things in the story are first seen in the Samaria story, which, predates at least 1,000 years what's in the Bible. So that's not to say that the Bible is incorrect in its story. It's just that it's a shared heritage that happened to a lot of cultured areas in the Fertile Crescent. The Fertile Crescent is like from where Egypt is up through the Mesopotamian area where the Euphrates and the Tigris is, which is where Samaria and Babylonia was, and then up into the ancient Anatolia region, which is modern day Turkey. Right, so it's like that half of the Mediterranean.
And there's a lot going on in archaeology and stuff in Turkey right now.
Yeah.
Well, that's where Göbekli Tepe is. That's Turkey. Yeah.
And that's that whole area is the Fertile Crescent. That's where the first language developed, the first written language, the first cities, these temples that they're finding. I mean, that's basically all of civilization, and that area is all around the Mediterranean, and
that's where all of these. Even the stories in the Bible take place.
Yeah,
it's right
definitely.
in the same region,
right on the coast
area
of the Mediterranean, where the Galilee region is, right up from Egypt, north of Egypt, is where most of the stories in the Bible take place. In and around the Dead Sea area, things like Masada and Jerusalem, of course, is in that area, which is one temple and one true city and all that. So yeah, I mean, it was there too. I mean, that was later in time. Much later in time. but that's where that area is. But that area of the Mediterranean Sea is connected to the Caspian Sea and the Black Sea. And this story in particular, this Noah story, has been written down from a prior oral tradition, because it's the flood story, and you find this flood story in all of these cultures.
It starts popping up, and which sort of substantiates that, hey, there was a shit ton of water here at one point, because it isn't just any one culture or one history that's saying it happened.
Right.
They're all kind of saying it happened, right?
Yeah, and it definitely happened. And because as civilization sprang into being, it was at the end of the last ice age. And as that transition took place and the ice melted and the waters rose from the ice cap that had came down to almost, I don't know, up right above the equator, like around to where we live actually is where it got to. But at any rate, civilization occurred after that. And these areas, the Persian Gulf and the Caspian Sea and the Black Sea, they have pinch points in them, really high land terrain areas that would have blocked off lower levels of water when that water was lower because it was in the form of ice, right?
So it was like a natural land dam or something.
Yeah.
That was, okay.
And then as the water got so high, it came through all at once. Now, that area...
Or this is all a theory, or is there archaeological proof that supports that that's what happened? It certainly looks like it, when you look at it, like geologically or whatever, on a geological map. Mm-hmm. It looks like that's very plausible that's what happened there, absolutely.
It's a theory with increasing amounts of archaeological evidence supporting it.
Okay.
For instance... I don't remember what the guy's name was, but there is a documentary about it, and this guy used satellite archaeology to match up the description given in the Bible of Eden and to where that was located physically.
Yep.
And, you know, as the description in the Bible talks about, it said that Eden was at the headspring of 4 rivers, which was the Tigris, the Euphrates, the Gihon, and the Pihon. You know, for years and to this day, we know where the Euphrates River is and the Tigris.
And the Tigris, sure, yeah.
But we never knew where the other two were, the Gihon and the Pihon. And recently, there is a lot of evidence that shows where these two rivers are. They're now dried up riverbeds that you can only see with satellite imaging that's able to see from way above and be able to see these veins and these, you know, where they used to be.
Right.
And you can clearly see these two main rivers that would link up with the Tigris and the Euphrates. Where they would link up to is where the modern day Persian Gulf is, like below where Kuwait is, modern day Kuwait. It would be past that into the Persian Gulf.
Like actually out into the ocean, or out into the Gulf itself, the water. Yeah,
exactly.
Okay.
So, you know, and that pinch point, if you look at the Persian Gulf, is like to the south, you know, bottom right of the map, if you're looking at it like a normal map, and you can see where that pinch point is, right? So if that water wasn't there with the Tigris, the Euphrates, and these two other main rivers, whatever they were called, because we don't know now, we just see that they're dry riverbeds. Whatever, they would have linked up in this area, and they would have made a delta-like area, which is like what you have in Egypt near Alexandria, which is where the Nile lets out all that silt.
Right.
And it all gets into various little riverlets and spreads out and makes this whole larger area that you can farm and stuff.
Right.
That's what the Persian Gulf probably looked like before written history, but after the last ice age. It was probably a delta area, much like in Egypt.
So it was like geographically, or it was like a bowl in the earth.
Yeah,
and then
with rivers running into it.
With rivers that ran into it.
And that was one of the difference in the description. The description of in the Bible said it was the head spring of rivers, that the rivers came from there, but actually they probably emptied into that. Right.
Okay.
And because they emptied into that direction, the other two still do. So that is one of the places that would have been ripe for civilization to start happening. So that is the people that lived there at that point in time. All of the stuff they had is gone. It's under the Persian Gulf. And I predict that in the future, as science is enabling people to do underwater archaeology, there'll be even more discoveries that will lend credence to this idea.
Well, they found like a pharaoh that was written about, but they could never in the water someplace, right? Like his whole temple and everything is submerged at this point.
Yeah.
But it like perfectly preserved.
And all over the world too, like in.
There was one in India. There was a lost city. It was written about in
Shangri-La.
And now they because it would have put it out in the ocean, and I guess the currents there are really strong or something. But now that they've been able to figure out that city is actually right where the books say it.
Yeah, a lot of cultural legends have cities that have disappeared in that way, and in most cases, things point to this, that they find under the water. I mean, because the water levels definitely did rise. That's definitely hard science that you can look up.
Well,
and
yeah.
see.
Otherwise, how are they building temples under these 50 feet under the water?
But I mean,
with no scuba,
Not but 60, 70 years ago, people never even thought there was anything under those waters
right.
at all. Now we're figuring out that some of our earliest history is under those waters.
Submerged.
Yeah, especially in that Fertile Crescent area.
Wow.
And right out where modern day Kuwait is today is where our oldest cities in the world originated. It's where our oldest language in the world, written form, originated. Right where Kuwait is, right? So if there was a group of people that predated those people before history was being recorded that only had an oral tradition, they would have been in that Persian Gulf area, not that far away. And if they were driven out of it by a flood, they would have carried that memory and that story with them. And it would have, to some extent, became the foundation charter of their race, the people that they were. And it would have been incorporated into their mythology or into the things that were important to be written down once language was invented.
So it's not to say that there appears to be an enormous amount of evidence that there was a giant flood. I mean, and substantiated through multiple cultures and multiple histories, right? Mm-hmm. How many of them have the big 2x2 wooden boat in them?
Well, the Sumerian story does. Noah is a Sumerian name. There are a lot of people in ancient Sumeria named Noah.
So that predates the Bible.
Yeah.
And there was a giant boat, like ark, and...
Well, that's the story. I mean, again, that's probably mythology. That's probably the Sumerian mythology charter myth, right? That's probably their description of how the people that survived got away from the flood into a place where they got together for the first time and started sharing their story. That's probably their mythology.
Like it amalgamated or something?
Yeah, into the idea that there was a guy named Noah who saved this race. And in the way you would tell the story, you're going to have to metaphorically tell this story to people, because that's all you have is an oral tradition. It's got to be in metaphor for the story to carry on the information, right? So the story probably came with them, amongst them, with them, into the new area that they were driven into. That the story that you tell your kids was my grandparents, they got on a big boat built by this guy named Noah, and the whole world turned to water, and we were on water for 40 days and 40 nights, or whatever. It rained, and we did these things to find dry land and stuff, and this is where we ended up, and this is how we got here. I mean, this is the story they probably told their kids to make sense of what happened, because they don't know. It's just oral tradition. There's no
because if that happened 100 miles away,
and even 400 years in their time, it would be time out of memory, right?
Right.
400 years for people who don't even have a written language, it's mythology to them at that point.
So you made a comment a little bit ago. You talked about how these tales were passed down, and they did it in such a way that it was like they weren't actually telling the actual story necessarily. They were telling it metaphorically.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a lot of that in ancient history?
Oh,
where these stories, is that like
that permeates all of ancient history.
So to say that they wouldn't have done that
would be to go against conventional thinking of scholars.
Well, in the all the other, like the Epic of Gilgamesh. I mean, do we now, because that's an ancient story, do we believe that everything in that's 100% true, or it was never intended that way, was it?
No.
It was written just basically as like a fairy tale to kind of.
No, it's basically it's a type of myth. It's just a different type of
like a
myth.
fable.
It's not a charter myth, and not a myth that explains how your race got to be
Right,
who they
right.
are and where they're at, right?
Yeah.
It's a different kind of myth, right? It's to explain things like mortality.
Yeah.
Okay? Essentially.
But it does cover
that's-
morality and things like that as well, doesn't
it covers friendship and loyalty
Right.
and being civilized
Right.
and the relationship of where man stands with the gods, you know, and all of that, right? But ultimately, at its core, it's about mortality. Essentially, I mean, you know, I'm really nutshelling it, but essentially, it's about the King Gilgamesh of Babylon and or Sumeria, and he ends up with a really good friend called Enkidu, and Enkidu comes out of the forest and he's uncivilized, and he's made civilized by having sex with a prostitute, which that goes a long way in showing why they say prostitution is the oldest profession. I mean, it shows up in the first story we can find on our planet. Wow, all right, you know,
and there it is.
and civilization, right?
Yeah.
But the idea is that civilization was so brand spanking fucking new at this point,
Right.
that you literally had to be kind of initiated into it, or it would make your head spin. It was
Right.
the ultimate future shock, because you didn't get little steps up to it. You were just out in the woods, and then boom, you're in the city. You know,
Right.
like holy crap, there's stuff happening, right?
Yeah.
So at any rate, Enkidu comes in, he becomes civilized, and he ends up getting in a fight with the Gilgamesh, the king, and comes to a draw, and they become really good friends, right? Eventually, they're having a battle, and Enkidu gets hurt, and he gets like an infection and dies. And Gilgamesh goes into like this depression and doesn't understand why the gods have taken away his friend, and why his friend dies, and why does the gods get to live forever, in fact, and men have to die, you know, and seems really unfair. I'm a king, I've done a bunch of stuff, man, I could live forever and do cool stuff.
Right.
So he goes on a quest to find immortality, which he finds in a flower, and he's on his way back, and he goes into a pool to bathe, and the snake comes out of the pool and takes the flower, and he loses it. And so he has to eventually come to terms with mortality without the Deus Mechicana thing, you know, where the god comes down or the thing fixes it. Like, he couldn't bring the flower back to make the potion of immortality. He has to deal with it like everybody else,
Right.
king or not. And that's why the snake takes it from him, because a snake is chthonic and it sheds its skin, right? So it appears to be... that's why you see snake symbology in a lot of ancient, and even today, modern day things like the medical symbols and stuff.
Yeah, sure.
Because
Yep.
they go to ground, they're chthonic, they go to ground, they come up, and they shed their skin, and so they seem like they're immortal in that way. And
So we talked about like the Ten Commandments and how that those sort of tenets were traced. You can trace them back through history. The flood, and how Noah's Ark ends up in there. How many other stories from like the Hebrew texts and the Bible and stuff like that have origins that also go back into multiple other cultures? There's a significant amount of them, right?
yeah, and the symbology does too, a lot of times, like, at least from the Christian perspective, there's a lot of stories and symbology that go back to prior religions or times.
Well, we definitely can see instances where when they merged Christianity. What was it? It was with It was in Constantinople, right? Is when that happened. It was what they call that meeting?
315, the Council of Nicaea.
The Council of Nicaea, right?
Yeah,
Where and it was like you had all these religious factions. You can correct me if I'm wrong, right? So you had all these religious factions that were constantly fighting with each other and causing problems with each other. And the king was Constantine, right? And he said, "Enough of this shit. We're gonna have one religion, and everybody's gonna follow it. And if you don't, I'm gonna cut your head off." Like it was like the end of it. And they slammed all these religions together.
Essentially, yeah. After 350 years of the Roman Empire persecuting Christianity, Constantine was trying to reunite the Byzantine Roman Empire. So at his time, the Roman Empire was split into two different empires.
I've heard that. I think it's Byzantine.
Byzantine.
Okay.
Yeah, it depends on. It's like aluminum or aluminum,
right?
But I don't know. I do Byzantine. I know that's how I guess I first heard it. But basically, it means that the empire was split in two, and he had just won the war that decisively made him ruler of both sides. And pretty much like you said, he wanted there to be a religion that unified the empire. And there's some people that say
because prior to that point, right, there was no Bible.
No.
It was multiple.
No, well, there was no New Testament. There was the Jewish Old Testament.
Well, no, right, but that's part of the Bible.
Yeah, right.
What I'm saying is there was no Bible as we know it today. The Jewish faith had their own. There was 5 main books.
Right. And Christians that existed of this time had those same 5 books.
Right.
But also had a plethora of other texts like the Gospel of St. Thomas, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, the Sheepherder's Scroll, the scrolls that were in the Nag Hammadi Library, the Dead Sea Scrolls were also circulated.
These people were what they called the Gnostics or something like that.
Not
right?
all of them. A lot of them were like the Gospel of Mary and the Gospel of Thomas.
So
those are Gnostic.
These were kind of like the people that followed followed Jesus around, like, or when that was over with, they sort of the followers of the faith.
All of the texts were written after Jesus had died,
Sure.
at least 72 years after.
Well, how do we know that? How do we know someone
the first writer of the Testament was Paul of Tarsus?
That we know of,
That
right?
we know of.
Okay,
yeah. I mean, the first things that we know of that was written in the New Testament were things that were written by Paul of Tarsus, and he was traveling the Roman Empire about 72 years after we think Christ died. Now, we don't know exactly when Christ was crucified, but it's somewhere between 4 BC and 6 AD, right? So, roughly speaking, at least 50, 60 years after Christ had died.
Did you tell me there appears to be some written text or something somewhere that at least confirms that this person
there's reference to there's reference like in the Roman records to a person that they called King of the Jews that was crucified for sedition.
Right.
But that's it. Like, we don't know if that's Jesus of Nazareth. We don't really have any kind of records officially
connecting that.
Any, like at one point they thought they found his ossuary, which is like a little box that would contain his bones and stuff. But that's yet to actually be proven. They think that possibly that's a forgery. But I mean, at any rate, there were texts that were written before, during, and after the time that he was alive.
And at this meeting, at this Council of Nicaea,
they pulled from all of those texts.
But also, wasn't paganism really big in that area as well?
Paganism was the only game going on in that, unless you were
at that time, I should say, in that area.
Yeah,
at that time.
I mean, like legally. I mean, there were Christians
because
and stuff, but they were hiding out.
Constantine was a pagan most of his life,
presumably
right?
he was, but he could have been a Christian. We really don't know. When he talks, there's a story that says that before he won that decisive battle that united the Byzantine Empire, that he had a dream, and in his dream he seen the sun in the sky, and there was a Christian cross on it, like the old Christian
Yeah, I've
cross.
heard this, right.
And so he got up the next day and he told all of his people to put that cross on their shields, and they would win the battle, and consequently they won the battle. So, you know, presumably you would think he was probably maybe one of those Christians. I mean, for 350 years Rome persecuted Christians like really, really bad, like sometimes crucifying them and setting them on fire to light city streets with at night. Like, it was not good.
You hear today that Christians are the most persecuted religion. It's like, well, it's nothing like it was back then.
Yeah,
I mean, they
man.
really disliked Christians
Yeah,
back
it
then.
was an
Holy
issue.
cow. They did
And-
some atrocious things to them.
Yeah, and so you know, it wasn't organized in any sense. There were little sectarian groups of people who were, you know, writing things, but it was one of the reasons why Paul is the earliest writings in the New Testament. Again, could have been some other document that would have been older, right? Because at the Council of Nicene, they had a whole bunch of documents, and they only pulled a few of them together, right?
Right.
They said, these are the ones that we think get the point across, right? But there were maybe 75% more than what they had, maybe 80% more, right? But they didn't maybe know they existed. Maybe they didn't have access. Maybe they just deemed them not to be worthy of
Right.
being included, right, in this thing. Maybe they were under pressure. Who knows? But the only reason why that Paul is the first writer is just because he happened to get the luck of the draw, or at least he wrote about what they thought was relevant, should have been in the New Testament, right? And also, too, Paul, unlike a lot of other authors of some of these ancient scrolls, was a bit more flamboyant and well-known. I mean, he was thrown in jail for disrupting the sale of silver figurines of Isis. In the Bible, it says that God created an earthquake and let him get out and stuff. But I mean, you know, he wrestled.
Not ISIS, not the Islamic State in
No,
Syria.
the deity.
Yeah, the deity
yeah.
ISIS, which was found in Egypt too, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And some of the writings in the New or the Old Testament can be traced back, like some of the writings in Psalms,
Right.
for instance, can be traced back to poetry, ancient Egyptian poetry.
Wow.
You can do a web search on this and just maybe web search something like Psalms, ancient Egyptian poetry, right? And look through. You should be able to find something. But essentially, you want to talk about some line by line, very similar
Plagiarism.
things. Yeah, right. And
Today we would call that plagiarism. You know?
well, I mean, hey, the ancient Egyptians did it to themselves too. They you know. But at any rate, yeah. So these books that they pulled together, you know, it was to unify.
And none of those Bibles exist today. Like, we're not really sure, right? They made like 7 Bibles or something like that. Didn't Constantine have that commissioned? And then it was split out, and then it went to like there was churches, and that was it. Like, bang, zoom, we're done. But none of those Bibles, like, no one's ever found them or know them to exist. Probably in the basement of the Vatican. Someplace.
Yeah, and nobody, and even more suspicious is nobody really knows for sure who was showing up at these council meetings. There were several. You know,
Right,
the
yeah.
final one was the.
I think it's just only reported that it was the religious leaders of the time or something like that, right?
Right.
But
Who was that, right?
Yeah.
you know, because I got to believe that if I was the head of a Christian cult, as it would have been defined in Rome at that time, and I'm ducking the law because of my religion, and then I hear, hey, man, the new king says, all you Christians, why don't you guys meet in this one spot? And we'll just talk about it. It's going to be all right. Like, no, we're not going to kill you like we have been for 350. It's going to be cool, man. Just show up.
Right.
Would you go?
No.
Probably not. I mean, like, hey, man, where's that one guy that keeps coming around trying to join the religion? We don't want him. Get him. So, like, you know, send that dude. And if he survives, then maybe we'll hit the next one. You know, I mean, But how much power did those people have? I mean, it probably wasn't those people, and maybe they just selected from the texts that were available that were common in their time and era.
Well, and we see the same. The interesting thing is right. We can see that these same tenets from these Middle Eastern based religions, Abrahamic religions, and stuff like that, and when you go into Asia, these same things start popping up again, right? And those were people that we know, I think, were fairly isolated from each other. Not that they didn't trade with each other, right? But I mean, but they were sort of fairly isolated from each other,
like
right?
Asian communities.
Yeah, like China, as
sure,
we know today, was.
I mean, other than the Silk Road, but that was much more an economical thing. But
Right.
ideas got shifted. But more importantly, even than how isolated they were, is that they had a whole different system than the Western apocalyptic version of Judaism and Christianity had.
Right, because they tend to see things as more cyclical,
Right.
and death is just part of life.
Yeah,
and
they incorporate reincarnation and the idea that the human psyche is flawed and you're going to have to live many lives to perfect it, right? Whereas that's a stark difference from, look, man, we don't have any time left. God's coming. Everybody look busy. We got to get going on because it's done and over with when he gets here.
You better get it right this time.
Yeah, this
or
time.
You go to hell
forever.
It's a little more defeatist, isn't it?
Well, that's why I call it a Western apocalyptic, because it's not something that promotes harmony
per se,
right? Yeah, because you got to get it right.
It's a start point and end point,
right? And if you believe it vehemently, like you're zealotly, that's going to lead to probably some kind of violence because you got to get it right tonight.
Right. Time's running out.
Right. And if I have to hit you over the head to make you, or if I have to kill you to get you to understand, then I have to do it before it's too late.
Has there been, okay, so...
I much prefer the one where, no, man, it's okay. You got some flaws. You'll be better in your next life. Just try to at least balance even so you reincarnate into the same level, right?
Right.
Like, you might get a little higher, but you don't do nothing crazy. You don't want to be a bug.
Right.
Just, that seems to be like, just
somewhere above whale shit, God.
A broader target to aim at, for God's sakes.
So, here's a question. This might be a little bit off topic, but here's a question. Do we see the same type of violence from the Asian religions that we've seen from what you would consider to be the apocalyptic?
Not social violence, not violence driven by
has there ever been a crusade, or an Inquisition?
No.
And I know I'm just picking on the Christians here because we know that those other Middle Eastern religions can be really problematic too.
They
when
don't
want
work
to be
like that, and it's probably the fallout from all of that history of having that real laid back idea of an afterlife, right? In general, the Asian afterlife is very bureaucratic. And there's a place for everybody.
So the Asians are like the hippies of antiquity, basically.
There's actually been anthropological...
I guess that's what opium gets you, right?
Well, yeah. Well, there's actually been anthropological studies done about Asian people and why they, as a race, tend to follow orders more than any other race, or submit to the social order easier than any other race of people that we found. We talked about this, and I don't know if we mentioned it or not, but I'm a senior at Ohio University, and I've got a...
All right, this is a for real passion for you. You're pursuing your master's degree in history. You want to teach this. You want to participate in discovering history and things like that. So,
in a few more semesters, I'll have a bachelor's in history and an associate's in philosophy, and then I'm wanting to go ahead and go to graduate school. But so at any rate, though, in our anthropology class, one of them that we were talking about that study, and that was the first time that I had actually heard some sort of science. Asians are pretty ordered people, It's I guess so. I mean, they're studying it. It must be real enough to study.
Well, there's definitely a regiment, it seems like, to their history and to their culture, that there were things that were, when you look at, what it took to be a samurai and the way that they had, a process and sort of a ritual almost for everything.
Well, and consider, too, that when I had mentioned that four civilizations started pretty much at the same time.
Yeah, and these weird, like they were separated from each other.
Yeah,
though.
yeah. But out of all of them, China probably contained its most, its original form for the longest, right?
Well, it's because of the isolation.
Exactly. Yeah, that's where that isolation really came. Their culture, was like that. Egypt did too for a really long time, but for other reasons, they never expanded and survived in that same way. They shrank a little bit, right? But they did too. They just shrank. But China is still huge, and it's pretty much in some places what it was in ancient times. Not a huge difference.
Except they have cell phones now.
Yeah, yeah. But so
that's an interesting dynamic, right? Because like countries that were isolated during the 20th century, when they opened their doors, they went like right past terrestrial landlines for communications and went like right straight. Like they went from no phones to cell phones like overnight.
There could have been a guy in some Asian Mongolian country who in the same day picked up a copy of an Arthur C. Clarke book, science fiction book, paperback, and a cell phone, smartphone at the same day.
At the same time.
Yeah, and just, just reading the science fiction novel and feeling like you're living in a hyper future already because you've got this phone that will connect you to anything.
Yeah, aliens might as well have just landed in the hand.
Right, yeah. It's like, and like we were talking about earlier, with all the things that's been going on in science discovery, it's going to be interesting watching some older science fiction shows. When they're talking about things like dark matter,
Oh,
whatever.
And that's a whole other podcast, man. Because I know you've got some really, you've read a lot on some of these new technologies and things that are starting to happen. So I definitely want to pick your brain about that. But getting back to, so there's definitely something different about those two cultures. And like you said, one culture sort of has an alarmist sort of the end times are coming and we're all going to die, and
the other people
so everybody better be good.
Orderly and
it's funny because that's sort of it's like that. I would call that like an authoritarianism. You have to do these things, and if you don't do them, we're all going to die.
Well, and it's
God's going to rain hellfire and brimstone on our city. Like all this kind of stuff. And then in those Asian cultures, they're more like, observe the lotus flower. They're real earthy and kind of everything's a cycle, man.
Consider it's not just the Asian culture. Actually, the phenomenon is transcendent of culture because that same attitude is the same attitude that you see in the Indian culture.
The Native Americans? No. Indians? Yeah. Because the Native Americans sort of had a very cyclical as well. Right?
Yeah, but that was But that's kind of a different. Yeah, they did, and that, like you said, that might be a whole other podcast because then you're getting into the idea that there are some theories that Native Americans were actually Asians.
Oh, right, because of the land bridge and all that, right? Of course.
So they would come from a heritage where their religion and their ideas
I think DNA would vet that out at this point. It should, right? So is that really a theory anymore, or is that a fact?
Well,
like Mongolia, and because a lot of people don't realize that
the DNA point to Polynesians, but they find also in that DNA examples of people from ancient Egypt and people from Asia, but most of it went DNA-wise speaking as Polynesians, which is why for a long time now you've probably been seeing documentaries if you're interested in that kind of thing. People showing how they can build boats that could island hop and still make it across that way because they're trying to prove what they've seen in the DNA.
Well, they're trying to find the physical evidence that supports what the DNA is telling.
But what blows my mind is that they occasionally find like ancient Egyptian DNA and stuff. And
that's another thing that's sort of starting to come out now in new discoveries in history and archaeology is that man actually moved around a lot more than we
in
probably
ancient times. Yeah, a lot more, a lot earlier than we knew. We're just now getting around to accepting that perhaps Leif Erikson may have found it or not founded, but
It
discovered
was
America.
Nova Scotia, right, or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, we're just now kind of coming around to that. And there's
Oh, you mean it wasn't Christopher Columbus?
no. The type of huts that we found, he didn't build.
No,
it was Vikings.
It was Vikings,
It was Dutch
yeah.
kind of
Okay.
people,
And the symbology that they found carvings, a lot of
like the Skryling tree and stuff like that.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So I mean, in ancient times, people got around. They just there was travelers the whole time.
So there's definitely a cross-pollination in the earliest of what I'd call to be the Middle Eastern religions. It looks like they all got their start, regardless, kind of from the same. They were all dipping in the same well, man.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then there was so there's the the three religions from Abraham that sort of came out of all of it. We got Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. Well, Christianity is just a derivative of Judaism,
which is
with
just a variation
with a messianic
of
component to it, right? But,
yeah.
They just sort of cut and paste, and then made some more stuff that went on the end. But it is interesting because you don't see that kind of historically, you don't see that kind of violence based on God in the Asian countries.
No. Or even the.
But you definitely see it in the Middle Eastern countries for sure.
That's how you got Vermonters firing against each other in the Vedic text.
And it's not. I'm not because I think the Viking religion was probably fairly brutal and violent. When you look at what they did for a living,
and where they had to live,
and so it's not like it's just like, well, all the Middle Eastern religions are just violent and that's it. No, that's not.
No.
It's not kind of what you're getting at. It's
no. I mean, if I'm getting at anything, it's just that there is an evolving way that we call religion, an evolving way of dealing with the human condition from prehistorical times into the present. And there really isn't a change. Like from the Sumerian history and mythology and religion gave way to the Babylonian mythology and religion, right?
Yeah.
The Babylonian king exiled a group of other Babylonians that were causing issues. These people went and moved into the Galilee region, and when they got there, they took the Babylonian religion with them. They had a female deity, which was the consort of a male deity, and she was called Asherah, and she was the consort of a deity called Yahweh. So,
right, because a lot of those ancient religions, there was no monotheistic religions, right? Most of them were, and when they did represent it, there was always the male and the female component to it too.
Right. And that's what these people had. These exiles from Babylonia took with them those concepts and culture of Babylonia,
right?
And had these deities, right?
Right.
Now, in and around this time, you get the very first ideas of monotheism starting to occur when you have the pharaoh Akhenaten, which some people say that a little differently.
Akhenaten or something like that, right?
Yeah,
I think I've heard on
a couple different ways, right? That's how it is with ancient Egyptian. You're really not sure, right? But anyway,
because there isn't someone that can come up and go, "Hey, you're not saying that, right?"
We said it with this inflection, but I mean, I think again that's how I first heard it. But Akhenaten, any of the papers that you would read from this period or art that you would see from this period is called the Amarna papers,
right,
or Amarna art,
which is a region, right?
Exactly, and it's the region that Akhenaten went out to found the center of his new monotheistic religion. Prior to this point in time in ancient Egypt, there was a lot of deities being served, and there was a whole priest class of people who had power and money and influence that were there to serve these deities. And serving these deities ensured the ordered working of society and their life. And that's how they viewed it. And this guy, Akhenaton, comes in and says, no, we're done with all that. We're doing this one thing here, and you guys don't even have a job anymore. Yeah. So that didn't go over well. I mean, if you look over at the history, you'll see that
you're all fired.
Right, yeah. Yeah, that Akhenaton got killed, and his name got stripped from everything, which in their culture means that he can't get into heaven because his name's gone, and they can't read him from the list. They can't put him on a list, and he's done. So he was barred from heaven for having this idea. That's what the priests felt. Well, you know what we should do as priests? Well, this is bar him from heaven, you know? Like, that's just about as you can get, I suppose.
Yeah, no kidding. Right? I mean, you're talking about getting shut out.
Right, yeah.
And they struck his name from
everything.
From everything, right?
Yeah.
I mean, destroyed his statues. And
yeah, that's how they destroyed his soul.
It was really hard to put him together,
yeah.
Right? Because the soul lived in the statues.
Yeah.
And it was really kind of hard to put him together, right? Because they did a really
it
bang
took a
up
long
job
time.
of wiping him out.
They really did, yeah. And but the idea is around this time.
So someone tried it. It wasn't like it was a new concept.
Well, he was the first one that did, right? And he's doing this in and around the same time these people were exiled from Samaria or from Babylonia. And so they got that idea from that person in that period, and they needed to have a more male-orientated society because their culture had shifted. And in any society that is a herding society,
right,
the deities are going to be male. And any society that's an agrarian society, the main deities will be female.
Why?
Because females are associated with
fertility
life and fertility,
and growth, and
yes, and and if their culture grew out of that agrarian situation, then their mythology did as well, and you'll see that over and over again in any of the ancient religions. But when these people left Samaria, they became a herding culture, so they got rid of Yahweh's consort of Asherah, and there was just him. So they adopted that monotheistic approach to the religion to set them apart from the Babylonians that they used to be. And that is where Judaism comes from. Because prior to that, they were part of the Babylonian culture, mythology, and religion, which was a Zoroastrianism culture, like a fire god culture, a culture that kind of worshiped the difference between law and chaos as opposed to good and evil. And so when they moved, they changed things slightly to offset themselves from where they came, to be their own people, to start their own mythological charter. And then that's where the 5 books of the Old Testament come in. And that's why in those 5 books you see stories, ancient Sumerian stories, because the Sumerians predated the Babylonians, and these people were exiled from the Babylonians, and then they became the Hebrews, and they had a whole different culture and mythology at this point. And so,
well, this was all, I mean, the Hebrews, that was all launched with Abraham, right? And there were
in their mythology,
right? And there's stories about Abraham communing with God,
and even the Dead Sea Scrolls talk about one of the messianic figures being a David-like figure, and one being more traditional messianic figure. So I mean, David in their mythology is the foundation of that. You know, like the credentials that this is where it started. Just like when people talk about Pentecost.
We're talking about King David, right? Like of David and Goliath fame and all of that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, my point is just that.
Well, you were saying something about the day of Pentecost.
Well, yeah, I mean, just as an example to what I was talking about, like a time when people try to pin down the beginning of something, like a lot of Christians will tell you that the beginning of Christianity was when everybody spoke in tongues in Pentecost.
Oh, right, yep.
And that was like the sign that everybody was incorporated into the Christian church. So I was just using it as an example to say that, you know, that if there was a moment in time that the Judaic religion started, it was at this time that they made that conversion to be monotheistic and got rid of Yahshua, and that the reason why they did that is because they were a herding society, right?
Right.
And so you can see that You go from Zoroastrianism, which is what they used to be, what the Babylonians were of that time, into Judaism, and then Christianity, as a lot of people may know, is an offshoot of Judaism, right?
But isn't it hard to make the argument that Christianity is really monotheistic?
If you're a Catholic, it probably is.
You know what I'm saying? Because you got the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, right?
Well,
and then they're told that they're all equal. Okay, well then there's three of them. No, they're one thing.
Well, that's actually...
So it's like this weird mental calisthenic that they go through to try to go, no, but there's still only one God. But it's like, well, wait a minute, what are you saying?
Did you know when I was telling you there were multiple councils of Nicene? Remember we talked? I said there was a bunch. It was just in 315 AD that.
Right. It wasn't like it was one meeting and boom, gavel it, and we're done.
Almost all of those other meetings was them hashing that out. What you were just talking about, whether it was God and the Son, or if it was God, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, and if it was the Trinity, that they have equal parts of power. That's what most of those meetings were about, figuring that out.
Is it the Son, as in
a manifestation of God, or is it an individual, or a demigod?
Or are we leaning to the pagan reference to the Son and rebirth, and it's like,
so they figured. I
mean, they did a good job, right? They did a really good job with what they were given to cram all these ideas together enough so that people will be like, okay, I'll get on board. Right?
There's probably people that were just surprised that there was somehow now an official empirical religion. Like, what?
Right.
It's official?
Right.
Because you guys were telling me, like, my grandparents, that they were hunting you in the streets. Oh, no, it's official now.
Yeah.
But, so you can see then how over time and dealing with the same human conditions, that attempts with Zoroastrianism, Judaism, Christianity, and then of course the European Reformation, and then everything that comes after that, are all these same attempts at having a workable spiritual system that promotes everybody getting along and not killing each other.
Right.
Under a historical length of apocalyptic tradition, right? So you're going to have a lot of variations.
Right.
There'll be a lot of people trying different ways because it's difficult.
And isn't it ironic that how much time is spent today, people still fighting and killing each other over, I mean, and secularly, we're the same religion, but you're not doing it right, kind of thing. Well, it's just amazing to me that still happens today,
That's why I was really interested this semester. We're about a little over halfway through. I'm taking a European Reformation class, and I knew a lot about how different ancient religions got started and what they went through and the various things like that. But I never quite understood how in the end, when, like in the ancient times, there was a lot of different kinds of Christianity and other types of religions before that, right?
Just like there is today.
Right. And then at one point, there was just one kind of Christianity for a long time. And then the European Reformation, then you ended up with all these other
That's where it
ones.
fractured again.
With different results on this end. And I always wondered how that end got, right? Because that's the end we live in. And so this has been a fascinating class.
Get the backstory of the European Reformation so that it make, you know what I mean? What's the, explain that.
Martin Luther King, not Jr., but the other guy, the older guy.
Not the civil rights leader.
Right,
before him.
But the rebel-rousing idealist, had some issues with the Catholic religion. Specifically and mainly, he didn't like indulgences. And indulgences were...
paying for sins before you commit them, like it's a get out of jail free card kind of thing, right?
No, it was everybody was going to go to. Okay, the Catholic religion invented purgatory first of all. I don't know why. I guess I should ask my professor
or do some research on that.
Right? Yeah, or something. Right? They invented purgatory, and that's where you go and wait to be judged.
Right.
Apparently, God's busy.
Sure,
and it can't just be done like
a lot of stuff going on, man. I mean, come on.
Talk to each person individually or something. I don't know, but you had to wait. And indulgences, all they were a way of lessening your time in purgatory. That's it. They didn't help you get into heaven or avoid you getting into hell.
So it was a mechanism through which you could literally buy your way
through the front of the line. Essentially.
It's a head of the line pass at Disney World.
Yeah,
right?
it's not even a free ride. It's just head of the line. You might still get up and say, oh, look, you're not tall enough. You're not as tall as this guy. You have to go now to this other
So it doesn't guarantee you're going to get into heaven. It guarantees you're going to get your judgment sooner.
Exactly. And what indulgences were physically, it was when somebody would come to the church and say, hey, man, I'd really like to lessen this time in purgatory. And the church would be like, okay, well, how about you build a barn over here? Or give us this land? Or give us this amount of money?
How do you get from
and it was normally money.
A dude being pissed off and flipping the money changers tables over in the temple, right?
Yeah.
To... hey, you want to buy yourself to the head of the line? You know, I don't understand how those two.
Well, it just shows you how quickly finances ruins religions.
Right, no kidding, right? And a lot of
yeah, you start getting money involved, and it goes south every time,
yeah,
man. I mean, like root of all evil. You just get, you know, I mean, any televangelist probably tell you a sad story about it. You know, and when Christ did it, at that point in ancient times in Judea,
we can get into that, but I think he was picking a fight.
No. He was. But
let's not go down that wormhole. That's a whole other block.
But I just want to say is because when you would go there and buy anything out of the temple, you had to exchange your money
for
holy money, right?
Yep.
And the exchange rate was terrible. And then you still had to buy whatever you were sacrificing, and that's the problem that he had. Was that this is not really what a church should be doing. You guys are really a machine pulling in money and using the excuse of it not being holy money to get more money.
Right.
You know, that you're saying is bad. So when he flipped those tables over, he was really making a statement to that effect. Now, granted, he did it in sight of a literal guard tower of the Romans, where they could literally look down and see this happening.
It was a direct affront to the church.
Sure, absolutely.
I mean, that's what that was. He was going in and so he was attacking authority, literally,
and trying to fulfill a prophecy out of Isaiah that's about destroying the church.
Yeah.
But you know, like a lot of
you can imagine, just like today, anytime someone attacks establishment power structures and authority and stuff like that. That's and I mean the unjust stuff because he was doing it because the argument there was this was unjust.
Yeah,
you know,
right.
But you know, in that same vein, he was like the first sort of civil rights. Leader.
Yeah.
I mean, for his church, for his faith,
right?
But
and that's like I was telling you that one time. There are whole textbooks that are written from the aspect that Christ was a rebel rouser, not just somebody who believed that the temple was corrupt and he was cleansing it, which is the spiritual outlook of that. But there's definitely texts that talk about his potential at being a rebel rouser to get the Roman occupation out of Jerusalem, because basically Rome came down there and took it over.
Sure, yep, right.
And for sure there were people like the Iscariot.
And like it is today, we're talking about a holy city. We're talking about something that's sort of
so everyone's
sacred.
got a reason to get them out of there, right? Because they're pagans, so the religious people want them out, right? But it was Rome, right? You just can't.
And it's funny because it's funny because that's sort of the story, in a sense, of the entire Middle East. It's when you look at the Russians' involvement in Afghanistan and our current involvement in the Middle East, and I mean going all the way back through history, Great Britain had their whack at it. You know, everybody's tried, and it's always the same thing with those people. It's like, get the hell out of our country. This is, you know, they all believe that all those religions believe that it's sacred. You know, and they don't want you there. You know.
Well, let me pull us back too, because we were talking about Martin Luther King. He had issues with the Catholic religion. That was one of them.
Sure.
There was a lot of them. And he posted them on a church door.
Right, he went and like nailed them to the door, right? Like
made a big statement. And for a while, people were giving him death threats. So some German prince took him to a castle and held him there in secret. And while he was at the castle, he translated the Bible from Latin into the German.
Or to German, right, okay.
That's why he was in a German castle.
The point being so that the common person could read it for themselves, and it wasn't just withheld.
Because these Catholic people, priests and stuff, who were not only just making stuff up, like with this indulgences and purgatory,
Right.
but they were also clearly ostentatious beyond reasonable ability. I mean, they were like in their rituals and service, they're decked out in finery and cloth and gold, and I mean, like, they had money, right? Clearly they had more than they needed. So going around and telling people, hey man, if you want to hurry up your eventual eternity, you know, it doesn't make sense, but you know,
Right.
but you can pay us. I mean, and they just made stuff up. Like, you could just donate money, and families did too. Like, if somebody died and the family felt that he didn't do enough for the church, they got together and put money to the church to help him in purgatory. It was a scam.
Wow, because that's not in the text.
No,
that kind of stuff's not in
no.
the text.
That's why he
anywhere.
changed
Yeah.
the Bible into the vernacular of German so people could read it and be like, "Hey."
So that's kind of the history of the European Reformation, right? And
Yeah, and from that point, man, it just splintered. There were all sorts of groups of Protestants from that point onward. There was these people called the Huns who lived in these little isolated social communities. And had like a charter that you had to follow to get in and be a part of them. And there was these one people they called the Protestant terrorists. And like, judging by what I've read that they've done, I'm not even sure the people that joined that group had religion on their mind at all. I mean, they were essentially like zealots that were there starting wars and stuff, you know, like they would attack with guerrilla tactics and stuff, the parts of these kingdoms at that time that were still Catholic, right? So I'm thinking that they're just using it as a pretext. You know, some people
To go kill
people, you know, or whatever the agenda was,
or take their stuff.
Yeah,
There seems to be a big. What do you got? Well, I don't got that. I think we need to have us a disagreement, you know, and then away we go, right? It's human nature almost.
And then you had the Calvinists, and from them you get the Anabaptists and the Amish and the Mennonites.
Right.
And so, you know, essentially, and then now today you have the non-denominational church, which is really no structure at all. You're really right back into what paganism was before Christianity began anyway. Yeah, because here in ancient times, the huge draw to Christianity was that it was based on a religion out of antiquity. It was based on the Jewish religion, right? And that Jewish religion had been around at that point for a really long time.
Right,
and they had this book, and this book said, if you do these things,
bad things are going to happen to you.
well, if you do these things, you'll get into heaven.
Oh, right.
Like, it was specific and clear. You had one Bible, the Old Testament, one set of rules, one church, one holy city,
and one God.
It was simple, right? Now compare that to what was going on everywhere else for hundreds of years, where you have a polytheistic religion where, even though we might both worship Roman deities, we do so at different times. Like, depending on what you're doing or what's going on in your life, you're going to pay homage to this deity or that deity for your needs at the time, right? So you're bouncing around to all of these different temples that have all of these different clergy that's doing things in different ways, right? So you really can't get conciseness, or really to know sure who do you sacrifice to. Like, if you need something and you don't really know, it's not clear, you're not sure, right? But in this religion, everything is really spelled out, right? So getting converts to it, that was some of the pull. And another part of it was that it taught that everybody was equal.
Yeah, speaking of converts, now I want you to tell me this. You've told me this story, but about
there was a drawback
about circumcision and was it John the Baptist?
No,
not
Paul
John,
of Tarsus,
Paul of Tarsus,
the guy that was the first
right?
writer
It
in
was like, well, because they were like, we need converts, and when someone's 30 years old, they don't want you snipping on their niblet, man.
So the Judaic covenant between God and His chosen people,
right,
the Hebrews, was circumcision.
But they did it when they were born.
Yeah, with flint and hot steel.
Right.
Or not steel,
which
but
was a
hot
whole
flint.
different thing than being 19 years old.
20, 30, yeah.
You're going to do what to me?
Right. And if you lived in the Roman lands, which is where Paul was trying to get his converts, that in the Greek areas, like Corinth and stuff, which is why you have Corinthians. But
Right.
those people, like when they bathed, when they exercised, and maybe sometimes in general, they would go nude to do those things, bathing, exercising, gymnastics, that sort of stuff that was all done nude. And so people would know if you were castrated or not. Yeah, I mean,
I'm sorry, no.
Circumcised. Yeah,
they would definitely know if you were castrated.
That seems bad. I don't know that. Wait a minute. Yeah, circumcised. They would know, right? Like you
Right.
couldn't hide it. And so, yeah, it was an issue. I mean, like it all sounds good. I'm no different than the guy ruling. No. And God loves me. Yeah, man, God loves you. It's all good. And yeah, I gotta have my penis cut. No, I don't know. Well, let me think about it.
Right, yeah, I'll get back to you. I gotta
Right.
talk to my wife.
Right.
It's,
So Paul, and this is the guy who was originally Saul, who was on the road to Damascus, got hit by the light, and he was a persecutor of Christians, and then he went on a mission, one of the first missions, maybe be the first mission, of spreading the word of God, which is what he was doing. At any rate, he goes to the Sadducees and Pharisees of the temple in Jerusalem. The Sadducees and Pharisees are basically the priests of the one temple, and he says to them, I've started 4 or 5 churches in the Greek East. My main one is in the city of Corinth. Things are going pretty good, but I'm having problems getting converts, and here's why. And he lays it on them, and he says, I was thinking maybe baptism could just take the place of circumcision as the covenant between God and his people. Now, consider that Paul is addressing this concept from the idea that in his eyes, Jesus Christ was a Messiah, and that when Christ died on the cross, he acted as a light unto the Gentile nation, right? Allowing anyone to worship Yahweh and not just Hebrews, because before Christ, you couldn't get into heaven, not Yahweh's heaven, unless you were a Hebrew.
right.
Right? So Christ fixes all that, right? But these Sadducees and Pharisees here at the temple, they don't believe that.
And the Sadducees and the Pharisees are who?
They're like the priests and bishops of the Catholic Church. They're the officiates of the church, the temple. They control and take care of. They're like high priests. Caiaphas is a famous high priest, and he was a Sadducee, and he's the.
And why is it called what Sadducee and Pharisee? Like, why is there that differentiation?
I don't know, honestly.
Okay.
It's probably a Hebrew language thing.
Is it like the difference between priests and bishops?
I don't know.
Maybe,
I really
thing?
honestly don't
Okay.
know. I assume that it's a ranking of some sort. But I'm not sure who outranks what or what their positions are, right?
Where they
I don't
fit on
know.
the chessboard?
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I really don't know. But he goes to these people, and in the Bible they call them the pillars. And they're talking about the pillars of the church, right? And from their point of view, they don't believe that Jesus Christ is the Messiah. They don't think nothing has changed. I mean, you got to figure if these guys are legitimate to any extent. They're looking at Paul and they're looking at each other and they're going, he doesn't know. No, it's not like that at all. No. Yeah, go ahead. Hold on. So they get back to him and they say, you said you had 4 or 5 churches in the Greek East. He's like, yeah, I've got converts. I've got a community. I've been writing to them. That's where the book of Corinthians comes from, is his writing to them. Which is
I think some of the most underrated books in the New Testament.
It's interesting.
Man.
Yeah, that and Leviticus.
Yeah.
And they're like, okay, well, how about this? How about you give us 5% twice a year of your church's tithings, right? So tithings are the money that you pay the church to keep the church going.
Right.
And so there's...
Well, that's what it's supposed to be for.
Right. And so what they're basically saying to him is, if you give us 10% a year of whatever money your church makes, then we'll get behind you on this, and we will, to whatever degree we can, canonize this baptism replacing circumcision, right? And the premise of it, the whole premise of this in the first place, it to a large degree comes from John the Baptist, right, who was doing this, right? But even before that, it's desert culture, right? desert culture had this thing where water was pure
Right.
and holy and would cleanse you, right? and even Orthodox Jewish people to this day, they have a thing called the mikvah, and it's like a little
Right.
bath, right? And in ancient times, they would have public mikvahs. But if you had money, you could have a private one. But if you touched anything impure, and there's a whole list of shit that's impure, like animals with cloven feet, women on their menstrual cycle, and
Yeah.
10 other million things, right? So you would
So
go,
basically, you just went every day to the mikvah.
yeah, you would bathe in the mikvah. You
Now, did you have
cleanse
to,
yourself.
Did you have to pay?
No, they had
Okay,
public
all
ones.
right.
Yeah, no, it was.
That just seems like
it's a
an
part of their
obvious
religion. They
money-making-
need that. It's
Yeah.
a tool to keep their religion oiled well. They have to do it. So it was public, and they would do that. So, there's examples of this in a lot of desert cultures, like Canaanite culture, Babylonian culture,
Dune.
Sumerian culture. Yeah, well, yeah, Dune. Yeah. I mean, really, any desert
Right,
culture,
any
because
desert
water's
culture,
important,
the
right?
spice, you know.
Right, it becomes holy at some
Right,
point
sure.
if it's pure
Right,
and stuff.
yep.
And it can be blessed by priests. So there's some foundation to it, right? And from Paul's perspective, it's pretty ingenious because he's tying that ancient roots of what the point of that is into a modern, for him and everyone else, movement.
Right.
That's still in every way connected to an ancient religion and things that must have seemed real and important to the people of that time.
Well, this is what's fascinating to me, because kind of coming full circle, right? So we started out and we started talking about how certain tenets and religions are almost universal and things like that, right? And so modern day religions are still pulling through those ideas and stuff that came all the way back from Samaria, even, is still being pulled through all of these different religions. Like, and it makes them really similar. Like, I think a lot of people think that don't realize how similar the Bible and the Quran are to each other.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's like, wait a minute, okay, so you get it, both Abrahamic religions, you know? It's
Yeah.
like, okay, well, how did that one, or, you know, how did it go so wrong or whatever, or how, you know, or if they're both from the same root derivative, you know, who's right? You know, I've made this comment before that, you know, when you look at Jewish, or you look at the law back, because this all boils down to Abraham's two first sons, Isaac and Ishmael, right? That's sort of where it starts to separate. The whole thing starts to separate between what is now Islam and what is Judaism, right? Is that separation? And I think that the rule was that the firstborn child, basically, the firstborn son is the one that sort of inherits everything. But then there's this whole thing about, you know, God, you know, say, you know, don't do that and take them out into the wilderness and all this kind of stuff. But so there's like this weird property dispute that's going on, but because of these two stories, or because of the story where one says, well, look, the rules were very clear, firstborn son, and the other one's like, no, it has to be with his wife, you know, that's the true firstborn son. And these two have been going at it for, thousands of years at this point over a bad property settlement and a shit divorce, you know.
Gulf of Tonkin in Vietnam.
Oh, Gulf of Tonkin.
Tonkin.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, the Gulf of Tonkin, right.
Yeah, you know what
Yep.
and you know how they say that was like a pretext for war? Mm-hmm. And the Romans did this in ancient times a lot too, right? They used that kind of a pretext.
They would like stage an event or something, and
or not be clear on an event, but you know, to justify a war. Like, can you imagine a better justification for an eternal war than that? Than what they've got going on with the property dispute? Like, it's a great pretext for war forever.
And I'm really simplifying this issue, and I get that, you know, but but you know, that's still where it starts. That's how it started in this particular case, and they've been fighting over that hunk of land ever since, you know.
I can simplify it maybe even further by saying that it's been my observation that every place that's hot, people war constantly.
Yeah.
Like in the desert.
Because of scarcity.
Well, I don't know, man.
I think
in cold regions, no one hardly seems to fight at all. I mean, when's the last time you heard of the Great Dutch War or Swedish army that
I don't know, man. It gets cold in Germany, and they fucked a lot of shit up. I mean, so I don't. The Vikings did too, man. They like to tear
that might have
stuff
been
up.
Scarcity.
Yeah, but I think that look, the Nile Delta sort of makes the opposite argument there, because there was an abundance in the Nile Delta, and the Egyptians loved fighting with people, but they weren't really an invasionary people, right? They were more fighting off invaders. That was kind of their thing, wasn't it?
No, actually, to be honest, they didn't hardly ever have to fight off invaders. They had, and to the west of them, they had the Western Desert that is the beginning of the Sahara Desert, the just largest desert in the world, right?
Which is just like a crucible that would kill anything that tried to come in that direction. Right. So it was like might as well have been a wall. Right.
To the east, to the right of them, they had a large mountain range that ended steeply in the Persian Gulf.
Okay.
So inaccessible that way. Below them, there really wasn't any civilization. It was Kush, which is like modern-day Ethiopia. So it was basically primitive jungle tribes down there. Nobody ever organized enough to go up there. So the only way that anybody ever attacked them was coming down through the plain of Megiddo. And that didn't happen often. In fact, it was so bad that at one time in the ancient times, the Egyptian arsenal was behind the times. Like, they had anachronistic weapons and war.
Well, there was a point
chariots.
in time in Egypt's history, though, that when the way they ran the chariots in that like U-shaped pattern, so that they would run down the front of an army with the archers, and they would just circle and just keep plugging these people. So there was at least a point in time that they were known
for that,
known for their military,
and they were known for their weapons and
stuff.
But that's back when they had. It was bronze weapons, I believe.
Yeah.
And they had maces and stuff, right? And there was a switch over into iron, and when that switch occurred, they didn't come up on it as quick as the other cultures around them did.
Because they didn't have to.
Right. The other cultures had been at war with various people the whole time and had been developing their weapon technology, but they fell behind, and it became an issue for them at one point. Like, when they started having a much harder time fighting off the few invaders that they did get.
So Jane of the podcast dog has just joined us in here. Say hi. So, all right. So getting back to it, right? We kind of diverged there, but the point being that you can see even today that these stories that are still under the underpinnings for a lot of these religions and stuff go back in antiquity a significant amount of time.
Yeah, into oral tradition before even written record and stuff. And
it's sort of funny because it's like they've all been trying to say the same thing for a really long time, right? A lot of these ancient religions and stuff in these texts and everything have been kind of trying to say the same thing, or tell the same stories, or sort of make the same points. And it's funny because I think that in religion we get so, as human beings, we get so wrapped up in whose version
the details
is the right version, that you sort of miss that they're all telling you or trying to tell you pretty much the same daggone thing.
I had a comparative religion class a few semesters ago, and it was taught by a rabbi.
Okay.
And I remember asking once, I said, why don't you teach in Hebrew, or, teaching, something that of your rabbi? And he said that they wouldn't let him because it would be like a conflict of interest, because it really is. It's a religion, right? It's like, I get that. But I was like, wow, why can't they teach Hebrew here or something? But at any rate, because your only choice is at the where I'm going to right now, at the branch I'm going to, is ASL, American Sign Language, and Spanish. So I took American Sign Language, and I done with that. I'm happy. Now I work at the library, and when I hand the students books to come in and study those ASL books, I'm like, man, I'm glad I'm done with that.
That's rough, huh?
Yeah, it was the hardest thing I have done in college. Like, I started off my first couple of semesters I got C's, but it slowly went up to a B. Never really got to an A, but and I enjoyed it and stuff. But it's like one of those things. If you don't just keep doing, you'll start forgetting it and stuff.
Right. Same with speaking Spanish. But, if you don't use it, you sort of
like going out to
La baño is
going out to the Mexican restaurant isn't still using it.
It was funny. I spent some time down in Tijuana doing a job, and how fast though being immersed it comes back to you. But so.
I don't know why I even went down that road.
No, right?
Yeah, there was something I was going to say about something. Now I can't remember.
Well, there's definitely a passion with you for history and for sort of these esoteric, if that's the right words, type of subject matters that you just don't get it. You don't hear a lot of people discussing them. And one of the things I find fascinating about all of this with you is that you sort of have the context that puts all of these stories on a map, like puts them together, so you can kind of there's a common DNA that you can trace definitely through the Middle East, and I'm willing to bet that same DNA probably exists in Asia too. Like there's a source DNA there. I don't know if it's Buddhism or I don't know enough about those religions, but I'm willing to bet you would find that same DNA permeates all of those, because there's Hindu, Buddhism, Taoism, there's like a bunch of them.
They're all related.
Yeah, but they're all related sort of.
Into the Vedic texts, I believe.
The Vedic texts? Yeah. That's interesting. So, you have a real passion for this kind of stuff. I mean, this is like your thing. How far back does kind of studying this stuff go with you? Obviously, you're studying it in school, but how far back does that go with you?
With religion, as far as an interest in religion, probably since I was maybe 12 or 13.
Because you're the person. This is one of the things I love about you, right? Is you're the person that when the XYZ religion knocks on your door, you're actually excited. that they're there. Right? Like
I'm ready to talk shop.
Like you bring them, bring them in, and you have you literally have a stack.
Yes.
Of handouts and documents from tons of different
all the people that have proselytized me about their various religions.
Now, are they all
pamphlets and books?
Are they all sort of some derivative of the Christian faith, or
so far?
So you've never had a Krishna or something come up knock on you? Well, not that they do that.
No. Because they don't have missions, right?
Right.
They're not that desperate trying to get into heaven before it's too late, man. They're laid back, and it's gonna be okay. They'll reincarnate. They don't need to go
just give
door
up
to
all
door.
your worldly possessions and everything will be fine.
They need to find nirvana. They don't need to convince anyone else.
So this is something, that you really are passionate about. You have a lot of knowledge about these subjects because you've studied all these different religions, to the point of even participating in their services and stuff, right?
Yeah, we had to, when I took the comparative religion class, we had to go to a Hindu temple and an Islamic mosque. And
tell me what your experience with the Hindu temple was.
And that was probably the best, man. They broke out the drums early on, and they did this drum circle, and it was polyrhythmic beats, which was different than in Western music, It was cool, and I was jamming, and then this guy came in to give enlightenment, and everybody chilled out and sat and looked at this dude, and he sat in a chair, and I was right beside of him, and he started talking. It was really cool, man. It was it didn't have the some of the Christian religions, when you go in you feel like a piece of crap. You're a sinner and you're here to repent, and you better do a good job, and you better not do it again, right? You're walking into it gosh, this is not really
are you going to church or going to court?
Right, yeah. And that would be Baptist religions and things like that. The best you can get is, and opposite to that, if that is best, is the Methodist religion.
Yeah.
The Methodists are the people that's oh, God loves you, you just gotta take him into your heart and ask his forgiveness, and he'll give it. You don't have to do anything. You just have to ask, and kind of like
the stuff Jesus said.
Yeah. The Methodists are closer to that.
Now, what about the Islamic? You said you went to an Islamic, so you went to a mosque.
That's a funny story because my professor, he said, he said that people in the class, there was a bunch of girls and me and two other guys, And he said the people in his class had reservations about going to a mosque, right? This is like right when Trump was starting to go for president, I think. And so he had organized a field trip to take everybody. So I'm looking at this group of people and I'm saying to myself, man, I don't want to go up to a mosque with this group of people. The energy alone, the negative energy that they're producing right now in the classroom without even being there is enough to hurt me. I don't want to go up there when they're there. I don't want to trust what they're going to say or do to be my impression, right? So before the field trip, I talked to my buddy Grizz, and I asked him if he would give me a ride up there just to visit, right? Like, I didn't call ahead or anything like that. The field trip...
The fact that you have a buddy named Grizz.
Well, he stayed in the car. And then I was in there for so long, he had to pee, and he got out, and he opened up the hood of his car and peed into the engine. Not into the engine block, but just into the engine.
Okay.
And the car lot was packed with people, man.
Okay.
I have no idea. I have no idea how he did that and didn't get seen. And the police called, and he just wasn't there when I came out. Like, I don't know how he concealed it, but that's what he told me. And I'm like, Jesus, man, why didn't you just go in? There's like restrooms in there. Okay, whatever, man. That's
the fear.
Cool. I guess, yeah, man.
The uncomfortableness.
Yeah.
Right. Someone named Grizz, I don't think's afraid of very much.
Well, he was pretty much dressed and looked pretty much like he has been every time you've seen him. You know what I mean? Like, he wasn't like dressed to be in a church of any sense or a mosque. Or, So but
you
I
go
go in. Yeah. I even before I get in, I'm walking up to the door, and this dude's like, "Hey, man, haven't seen you around here. You don't look like you know where to go. Is that right?" I'm like, "Yeah, actually, that's true. I came up here from the university, and I just came to check it out." He's like, "Cool," and he says, "Let me show you around." I'm like, "All right, cool, thanks." Took me in. Set me in the office and had some people come in to talk with me. They gave me like 3 Qurans, one of which I gave to you.
Yeah, I have one of them. Right? Yeah.
And a business card to call if I had any questions. They answered every question that I had. They fed me food that was really good and gave me water and hung out. Like 3 people came in and just hung out and talked. It was really casual. They said, "You come up anytime." They asked me if I wanted to be shown around into the places I could see, the ones that weren't off limits because of holy issues and stuff. And I didn't really need to, not because I was just writing a paper.
Right. And they knew this, right? I mean, they knew you were there not to convert to their religion or anything like that you were there just because it was part of a comparative religion course or something.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And they were totally cool with it. I mean, they proselytized very, very little, unlike a lot of Christians have in the past, with me. They really tried to get me converted into the religion. These guys left it pretty open, And in fact, I think to some degree, I could feel a bit of paranoia on their part. Lots of things are going on in the news at that time, and I really think they were
tense.
Man, we're really good people here. Let me feed you. I mean, they were overly nice to me, but not in a bad way.
Almost for the bad publicity.
Yeah, so it was a really cool experience to do that. And it didn't, and I would have never thought twice of it. I mean, if I would have been driving by and didn't have the class and got hair at my ass to do it, I would have done it.
Right.
So that's one of the things I like about going to college. They have you doing stuff that you normally think, well, I might have done, but I didn't take the time.
Right.
But now, if you take the time, not only do you do it, but you're also getting some sort of accolade, some kind of a grade or comment on. Yeah. So it's a bit more satisfying in that sense.
So you went to a Buddhist temple too after that, right? What was your experience with that?
We meditated. That was the main thing that we did. We all went to this small little room that was for like people who weren't kosher, to use another religious term. down with the
I'm like,
system.
Really?
Yeah. No, they're not.
Okay, tell me how that works.
But people that weren't down with like what was going on that day, they took us in this room and they basically just meditated with us. We basically went in a room and hung out for 22 minutes or so, not talking, not moving a whole lot, and then that was pretty much it. So there wasn't a whole lot of satisfaction, at least in terms of me having a lot to write about, right? Because Buddhism is really about chilling out and finding your
Your
inner
inner self, right?
Yeah,
Like
so,
introspection and all
right,
that.
to
So,
expect some sort of a show or demonstration.
Right, what were you
is
gonna
really
get?
like,
Yeah.
yeah. So that was the hardest paper of the 3 that I wrote. All the other ones wrote themselves. You had lots to talk about.
That's very interesting, huh?
Yeah.
So you would say though that your experiences in all 3 of these though were overall they were just all, it was positive. I mean, you had a positive experience in all.
Yeah, I
those
did, but I think that the reason why maybe it was positive for me is because I had no stake in it.
Well, you did have an agenda.
Yeah, just an agenda.
But your agenda was education. So, I
Yeah.
mean, that's sort of...
Yeah,
that's
but
what
I
you
mean,
were
I had
there
no
for.
stake in the religion, right?
None, right.
Like, I'm not taking it. I mean, I'm not to say
It's
that I
fascinating
didn't take
to me
it serious, but
You're so into religions, like all of them, but you're not a religious person. I mean,
No.
you're not a... Well, I shouldn't
an
say it like that.
anti-theist.
You're not a person of faith or
No.
whatever, right? You're pretty...
Yeah, I'm an anti-theist. I believe that legitimately talking about any kind of a deity, whether it's Christ, God, or whoever, is as legitimate and sane as me and you sitting here and legitimately talking about the tooth fairy and what we're going to do to get money from her and how she works and why she gives the amount of money that she does, and you know what I mean?
So
Like,
what is it though then, if that's the case, right? So what is it about it that... Because you're not getting any kind of fulfillment of faith from it. So what is it? What are you getting from it? And that's kind of an interesting thing, right? Because that says there's more to it
entertainment.
than just it's entertainment. For
Yeah,
you.
I'm an
Or
affiliate.
you find it interesting.
Yeah, I'm an affiliando of religion. I'm interested in it. I find it entertaining too. I mean, downright entertaining. I find it amazing the amount of templates created by the human condition, you know, to explain and understand and relate to the metaphysical world and ourselves and our place within those 2 spheres, right? All of these things are attempts and manifestations at explaining this or reconciling with these things that we truly have no control over, that truly are not sentient in any way, right? And
Well, it's funny because even though you're not seeking out some sort of fulfillment of faith, for your entertainment, you need there to be people that do.
I would
right?
hope that would not end.
Right, so you actually hope that people
do.
find God
Right.
in a weird sort of
I
way,
do.
right? You hope that people find God and have faith.
You will never
and-
hear me intentionally talk a person out of anything that they truly care about or believe. and I wouldn't want to take that away from people. So many people are like that and obviously need that in their lives.
Yeah.
And there's been studies on it that there's a part of your brain that reacts to those kind of things that you need, right? I'm able to get mine in a different way than most people. I still get that, right? But it's not through that mechanism. But most people don't know any other mechanism or don't even understand what they're coping with. So they go through these motions. And they believe because they don't understand, because if you don't understand, you have to believe. And if you understand, you really can't, right? So, you know, they go through these motions of these religions and they get on with their lives. And it becomes complicated sometimes. And we were talking, I mean, like, okay, like Joseph Campbell is famous as saying that every religion eventually becomes silly at some point, and the dogma of every religion, it's just silliness, right? Like, you don't need this stuff to get on, right? And there are even self-destructive religions such as Jainism. If you guys haven't heard of Jainism, look it up now. Check it out. It's crazy. The idea.
No, seriously, wait, I'll Google it. Go Google it.
Yeah,
I'll wait,
go Google.
you know?
Yeah. While you're Googling it,
Yeah.
you will find it, and you know, maybe this will entertain you, but you will find that these people, the object of their religion is the objective of their religion is to cease to take in anything of the real world. So they start off by not eating a whole lot and not walking that much. And the reason why they don't walk is because they don't want to crush the little insects under their feet, potentially, and the ground, or disturb the fungus of the system, which actually has a name. It's a type of ecology. Anyway, they don't want to do that, and then they try not to eat, and then eventually they go from eating meat to being a vegetarian, and then eventually they go from being a vegetarian to eating only spoiled vegetable matter that's not even living.
It's already dying.
Yeah, it's already dying. And they wear masks over their faces, like surgical masks, again, so that they don't breathe in any bugs.
Well, that'd be a good thing because their breath must be horrible, right?
Oh my gosh. And if you're successful at this religion, you will just simply stop moving and stop eating.
You die.
Yeah. And
so it's a death cult.
It is. And to an extent. And if you don't succeed in dying, like say you're a member of the community, the church, but you just haven't got to the point where you're doing that, because that's like they're monks, right? There's like one city practically that does this, right? And there's people that live there. They don't starve themselves, right? They can't, right? They can't bring themselves to kill themselves. So it's considered, though, that the more like that they are, the better chance they have of reincarnating into something better than what they were in this life, right? So they get close to it. The closer they get to it, the better chance there is of them coming back in a better way. And of course, if they absolutely achieve it, they're in.
But they're dead.
Yeah. But their next life is going to be great. They're gonna have a really good incarnation.
As we cruise into the closing this out here tonight, right? What is the most what's the craziest shit in a religion, like for you, that you've ever seen, or what's one of the most entertaining things that you've seen in some sort of established religion?
In terms of, well, okay.
Well, obviously, I mean, Jainism is maybe that's it. I don't know. Is there a religion that's even wackier than that exists?
Yeah,
out there?
I think that there is, but it doesn't exist anymore.
Or that but it did exist at some point,
yeah.
right? Well, what was that?
And this may be terrible of me because I suppose it's vaguely entertaining, but it's the Applegate fiasco, where it was the Hellbop Comet cult.
Oh, right.
And all those people went out and bought the similar sneakers and got the black thing to lay over them and like killed themselves.
Yeah, but that
so
was
that their soul would go up into the UFO.
That was like the Southern California version of Jonestown,
sure,
right?
Yeah.
So I mean,
but that's what I'm saying. As far as entertainment value, like they're ejecting their soul out of their corporeal body so that it will go up into a UFO that's in the tail of Hellbop Comet to go back to the Pleiades system.
Right.
I mean, I suppose maybe Scientology might be more convoluted, but for a cult that actually wipes itself out in its own stupid, tightly convoluted idea of what happiness...
You mean convoluted?
Yeah, convoluted.
Like
or
really,
really
complex.
Yeah,
and
tightly nestled in circular logic that can only end in destruction. I mean... That's entertaining to some degree. I mean, it's like a self-correcting problem, man.
Right,
I mean,
it
just goes to show you that people are throwing darts at a dartboard, and some people miss terribly.
Well, it's amazing how many people think, I got it.
I know what we need to do.
Yeah,
everybody, $20 to get
me.
sneakers.
Yeah,
okay, that's important. I don't know why.
And what happens inside somebody's brain where they go, "Oh yeah, man, I buy that shit."
Well,
where does that come from?
You can get on YouTube, and you can find the rantings of Applegate. I think is his last name. I think it's Chris Applegate.
Okay,
but I believe it's Applegate. And he's got YouTube videos, or maybe he didn't put them up, but somebody put them up. But there are YouTube videos that are roughly 45 minutes or an hour in length of him just ranting about his spiritual beliefs and what's really going on in the world. And
so I heard a comedian say this one time. It was Joe Rogan, and he said that, and again, this is unreferenced, but I'm trying to paraphrase it. He said that the difference between, or he was told by somebody that the difference between a cult and a religion was
taxes.
That in a cult you have some really crazy person that writes all kinds of wacky stuff or makes all kinds of rules or something like that, and in a religion that person's dead. Like, that's the difference, right? So you can't go back and go, what the hell did you mean by this? That person's dead, so now it's canon, right? It becomes fixed, and that's it.
And speaking of what you had said earlier about whether the Christian is a monotheistic religion, and you talked about the Holy Trinity, and we did, like, don't forget that there's also all the choirs of angels that exist within that structure, and all of the saints that exist.
Well, the
within that
Catholics
structure.
definitely,
Well, I mean, that's supposed to be
Mary the
Christianity.
Mary the Mother of Jesus,
Yeah,
and I mean, there's a whole lot of praying going on there
Right,
to different entities and
so
stuff.
I don't consider the Catholic religion to be monotheistic.
Really, in practice.
Yeah,
No,
no.
but I think if you asked a Catholic,
Well, sure.
they would say, no, you're wrong.
That's like
You know?
another podcast.
This
This is my buddy who's a Catholic. This is Ask the Catholic.
Yeah. Although,
know?
I don't know if they would be too fond of being, questioned like that, but
No. Some religions might be. I mean, I don't know.
So I think we've probably exhausted this subject here. We're coming up on 2 hours, so man, I really appreciate you coming and doing this. I find
Lot of fun.
your knowledge of history just absolutely fascinating. And folks, look this stuff up. If we're wrong, let us know. We'd love to have the debate down below in the comments for sure. But
Yes.
But that's been the show tonight. That's the podcast for this time. Eric Smith is my friend. I'm sure he's going to be back for more of these, I hope.
Debate me, don't hate me.
So that's the show, and thanks for listening. Have a good night, everyone.
Bye.